The Ontario Liberals need the support of one of the opposition parties to pass the 2013 Ontario budget. The PCs, admittedly, even before reading it, insisted they'd vote no. And so far, the NDP aren't saying what they'll do. Joining us now for more on why they're doing what they're doing, the opposition finance critics. Peter Shurman, the Progressive Conservative member for Thornhill, Michael Prue, the NDP member for Beaches East York, and Kevin O'Donnell. He is the finance critic with the Green Party of Ontario. A reminder to all of our viewers tonight, our online editor Daniel Kitts is hosting a Twitter chat right now, so chime in with your thoughts on the Ontario budget. Use the hashtag AgendaTVO, and welcome critics all to TVO tonight. You saw Charles Sousa unveil his first budget today. You saw what his priorities are. Has he hit the right priorities?
He hasn't hit any priorities, and that's the biggest problem with it. And yes, we did decide to go no on the budget vote, but really, this is not a vote against a budget. This is a lack of confidence completely in a government that is guilty of two things. One, under Kathleen Wynne, continuing the legacy of Dalton McGuinty, where you throw money at problems and try to solve them that way. So we see what's supposed to be a measured budget with a $3.6 billion increase in spending. Secondarily, there's no plan to address the 500,000 plus people who have no work in the province of Ontario. There's no jobs plan. So there's no control on spending, there's no control on jobs. These are the two chief things. They talk about balancing the budget, but they don't really do it. And I can get into numbers, and I'm sure we will later, but the bottom line is there isn't going to be any balance by 2017-18. So the bottom line, the Liberal Party, which is prepared to retain its power by buying seats in Oakville and Mississauga, by canceling power stations and spending $600 million, $700 million, $1 billion, whatever it was, is now prepared to spend $1 billion a year, and we cost it at approximately that, by doing what the NDP wants. So we've effectively abdicated power on the part of Kathleen Wynne and shared it at the very minimum, if not actually made Andrea Horwath the de facto premier.
Peter Shurman believes that the Kathleen Wynne government has basically purchased your support. Is that true?
I don't think they've actually purchased it. I mean, we did put forward 7 key demands that we wanted to see in the budget, and those 7 key demands are in the budget. What we also put in, which did not make the budget, is about $1.5 billion that we wanted in extra tax revenues to pay for our key demands. That was conveniently left out by the Liberals.
This would be by raising corporate income taxes?
One of it was to stop the corporate income tax rebates on HST for entertainment and sports events, and that's about $1.3 billion. And the other one was to cap CEO salaries in the broader public sector, because we think they're way out of whack to where they should be. And combination of the two, about $1.5 billion, which would have paid for the $1 billion that Mr. Shurman's talking about in the 7 programs that we advocated.
But I think I heard you say you do acknowledge that of the things that were on your checklist, you did see most of them in this budget today.
We saw them, but they're not exactly written down the way we wanted to see them. We asked for 15% reduction in auto insurance. Yes, it's there, but we asked for it within a 12-month time frame. There is no time frame. We asked for a guarantee for 5 days for people coming out of hospital for home care, particularly elderly people, and and that's not there. And so we have a whole dichotomy between places like Toronto, where the rate now there's about an 8 or 9 day wait, and some places in northern and rural Ontario where it's up to 262 days. We want the 5-day guarantee. It was not there, although there is money. And we wanted a job program for youth, and there is a job program for youth, but it's not exactly the way we would have done it. So it's not an NDP budget, it's a Liberal budget trying to do some of the good ideas that we put forward.
We will come back to whether or not you are going to support that budget. How do the Greens regard this budget?
I think it missed a lot of the key aspects that we're looking for, namely eliminating the clean energy benefit and putting those proceeds towards the deficit, which would bring it down from a $10 billion deficit down to 9, and put Ontario towards ending the deficit perhaps years sooner. Or at least using that money for progressive purposes. And I'm surprised that the NDP don't call for things like this. You know, there's lots in the budget about making driving cheaper. There's lots in the budget about subsidizing the largest energy users residentially in the province. But there's no pressure except for coming from the Greens to say, let's accelerate the Ontario Child Benefit. Instead of staging it over 2 years, up to $1,200 this year and up to $1,300 in 2013, why don't we just spend $90 million? That's all it takes to implement the full regime now, and put money in low and moderate income families. You know, real progressive aims that are also fiscally conservative measures. They're like, let's If we're going to go into debt, let's do it for good purposes, not just for lying to Ontarians about the energy prices. So, and these are recommendations from the Drummond report or the social assistance review. So this isn't even a Green. We're saying we need to do this, but it's coming from the government's own recommendations.
Drummond on getting rid of that clean energy benefit.
Yes.
Okay.
Or at least let's put it to better use than just throwing it on the debt.
Why don't you give the NDP friend of yours across the table some advice on how you think the New Democrats ought to vote on this budget?
Well, I would put it in a very simple line. Michael Prue, please tell your leader, Andrea Horwath, to put this poor government out of its misery and Ontarians along with it. We have 13 million people here. This is a third of our country, more than a third of our country. We have between 500,000 and 600,000 people on any given day out of work. A premier who couldn't figure out what the unemployment rate was when asked last week, whose priorities are nothing more than staying in power. Staying in power. And she hasn't even got a mandate from the people. She should be going to the people and saying, tell me that you approve of what it is I want to do. Look, well, there are two parties.
I'm going to call you on something here, okay? When Ernie Eves took over from Mike Harris, how long did he wait before going to the polls?
When Ernie Eves took over from Mike Harris?
It took a year and a half.
About a year and a half, 2 years, right?
Okay, so she's been in power for 3 months. So she's entitled to stay a little longer if the Conservative history is any indication on this.
She's in a minority government that prorogued the House in disgrace after being found out on a scandal of monumental proportions. There's a great deal of difference here. And this is a scandal-ridden government. It is the McGuinty-Wynne government. It is a government that's carrying on the legacy that began with things like e-health or a promise of no taxes and what's so-called health premium, these kinds of things. And most recently, the unfathomable expenditure of money and the admission of doing so to save their own skins on power plants. This is a government that will do anything to retain power. So when we hear things like, this is a budget for Ontarians, by Ontarians, for Ontarians, no, it's not. It's a budget for Liberals, and Liberals right now need NDPers. It's just that simple.
And so I'm going to the NDP next. I want to, if I can, ask the control room to put this chart up, because I know we just sort of informally went through your checklist here, but I'd like to do it a bit more formally right now. The NDP on its checklist asks for 15% cut in auto insurance premiums, and in the budget today, you did see the minister say there will be a 15% auto insurance rate cut on average.
But it did say within 1 year in our...
And it didn't say that in the budget today.
Okay.
That's fair enough. The NDP did ask for $195 million over 2 years for a youth job strategy, creating 25,000 jobs in your view. And what did Charles Sousa come up with today? He came up with $295 million over 2 years for a youth job strategy, creating 30,000 jobs. Let's do one more. The NDP did ask for a 5-day home care guarantee for those people who just get out of the hospital, as you pointed out. What did the budget call for today? Didn't specifically refer to that 5-day home care guarantee, but it did say 46,000 more people would receive home care quickly because of additional money they were putting on the table. Does that not get close enough to allow you to vote for this budget?
Well, I mean, it gets close enough for us to go out and ask the people that we have been dialoguing with over the last many months and through that whole period when we were prorogued. We believe that we need to talk to people. We need to ask them whether this is acceptable. They have told us what they wanted. These 7 priorities were not dreamed up in a back room by the NDP. They were from ordinary people who were crisscrossing the province, asking them what they wanted, what they needed, what would help the most. These are the 7 things that they told us, and we're going out to ask them, are you satisfied? Is this sufficient? Do you want some guarantees? Do you think, you know, is this, and we're going to be judge ourselves on what they say.
And how will they indicate to you whether they approve or disapprove?
Well, I know that today that we are setting up some phone lines. We are putting out information. We are doing stuff on the computer, you know, emails, the people who have contacted us, inviting them to contact us, let us know what they think. Is this sufficient?
Okay, the Conservatives said the NDP ought to put this Liberal government out of its misery, pull the plug and have an election called. What does the Green Party say?
That's a good question. When I spent all day with Mike Schreiner, the leader, who's running in Guelph, and we focused on what our priorities were in the budget and what we thought how it could be improved. We obviously don't get a vote in the legislature right now.
But if you did, would you vote to pull this government down and go to the polls?
Thinking about the question for literally the 5 seconds since you asked me, I would say yes. Right now, that's me, not as the Green Party.
You would take the government down on this.
I would vote no on this budget. Whether the government falls on it or not would be up to the other.
You think you think this budget is that egregious that it ought to fail?
I don't think it's egregious. I think after prorogation and after these scandals, I think the electorate deserves a chance to make the next call.
Okay, Peter Shurman.
It is egregious. It's egregious, and it's an affront on the people of Ontario because it is a collection, as have the last 9 budgets under this government, being a lie. It's a lie.
What's a lie?
A lie is telling people that you're going to balance a budget, which, and if people are not familiar with what balancing a budget means, it means that we don't spend more than we take in. And when you do that, the credit rating agencies say nice things about you and rate you high.
But what's the lie?
Companies invest in your province. They employ people.
Hang
Those
on.
people pay taxes.
I got to call you on this because
what's the lie?
The use of the word lie is a very strong word. And if they had failed to meet every target so far, you might be able to say with some legitimacy the claim of balancing by 17-18 is a lie. But they've hit their targets 4 years running, which you can't say about Jim Flaherty in Ottawa. So where's the lie here?
I would say that they've fudged their targets for the last 4 years running, and I happen to know how. And I'm not going to get very technical, but let's just take the deficit from last year, which got applause in the legislature from the Liberal side when Charles Sousa was reading the budget, when he announced that the deficit was only going to be $9.8 billion when he'd actually projected, or his predecessor had, $5 billion more last year. The fact of the matter is that without getting into intricacies, that's fun with figures. And that's why this year we're projecting a deficit of 11.7, $12 billion. It's going up, it's not going down. And he's talking to us about a budget that will be balanced by 2017-18, and he shows it by putting in program spending that's constant on page 109, Steve, for a guy who didn't read it, not bad, huh?
Not bad.
$118 billion in the last 3 years, each at $118 billion program spending. No change whatsoever, not up, not down.
I see that
Can
here.
you believe that?
Peter
That's
Shurman,
a lie.
I see that on 109, but I'm going to flip back to 107. And it says here on page 107, Ontario currently has the lowest program spending per capita among Canadian provinces. And here's the chart that shows us spending our projections going forward to have the lowest program spending per capita in 2012-2013. So you say they're spending like drunken sailors. I got a chart in the budget that says that's not true.
They can put a chart in there that says anything they want it to say. Here's what I know. That if you project the budget the way they have on page 109, and you look at 2% on health, which is the biggest single expenditure that we make, to give you an example.
$49 billion.
By 2017-18, they're spending 50% of everything that comes in on health, and they've got to pay for everything else on the remaining 50%.
But
not possible.
Peter, I'm going to ask you one more before I go back to Michael here. But this chart clearly shows we're not spending like drunken sailors. We're actually spending per capita less than any other province in the country. So how is it that you charge that the spending's out of control?
We have a spending problem that's been recurrent over all of that period of time. You can talk about per capita. If you want to talk about per capita, let's talk about debt. When a child is born today, that child owes $20,000. So you can, like I say, you can take per capita figures and you can do it any way you want. Where I come from, when you take in $12 billion less than what you're going to spend, you have a problem. We have a problem because we can run an efficient government with a progressive conservative party platform in place that comes in on target, and on target means you take in this amount of money and you spend the same.
Okay, I need to have a better understanding, and I tried to ask you this in the lockup today, and your leader wouldn't give you the microphone, so I didn't get the answer, so I'm going to try it again right now. I need you will do your consultation. You will hear back from the public via whatever, polling, town halls, online surveys, do whatever you like, all that stuff. It will come into the NDP caucus and the leader's office, and you will presumably consider all of that feedback, and then how will you decide whether or not to support this budget?
We usually decide things by consensus, and usually around the table there is consensus. We're New Democrats. We have the same goals, the same ambitions, the same everything. On occasion, if it's really hard, we will take votes. In the end, if it's, the leader is not the first among equals, the leader does have more sway. She is the leader. She ultimately has to make the decision. But I will tell you, she wants a united caucus behind her. And so the chances are it will be done by consensus, and we'll all come out of the room with the same position.
I don't expect you to, I understand caucus confidentiality. Mm-hmm. There are 18 of you?
There are 18 of us.
Can you give us a sense right now of what the percentages are among that 18 who are more inclined to go for an election versus more inclined to support the budget?
I will tell you, when we talk about the budget, there is more inclination to support the budget. When we talk about the money wasted in the gas plants, when we talk about what the Liberals have said and misled the House and won't fess up to what the monies are, it's the opposite. I mean, we're trying to deal now with the budget. We're not trying to confuse the two issues. The Conservatives think that they're one and the same. They don't even care what's in the budget. They want to vote against the government because of the gas plant. But we're trying to look at what the people of Ontario want in this budget, what they're going to gain or lose from the budget. So that's the difference between us.
So the caucus sounds genuinely torn.
Well, I don't think that's an unfair thing. In terms of the budget, less torn, but in terms of, well, we're torn in two different directions. Mm-hmm. In terms of the gas plant and all of the things that have happened, Orange, e-health, all of the money that's been wasted, we think that this is a government that is wanton. This is a government that will waste, and that's why we want guarantees in the budget. We don't just want to have a blank. We want to know exactly what they're doing. That's why we want a budget bill. We want to look through it line by line because the trust is not there.
Okay, here, last question then before I go to Kevin. This will be a helpful question for your friend Peter Shurman across the table here. If you believe this government's untrustworthy, and if you believe this government has in some respects lost the moral authority to govern because of the scandals around e-health, Orange, the gas plants in Mississauga and Oakville, how can there even be any discussion about whether or not to support this budget?
Well, there is. It comes back to you. I mean, Kathleen Wynne has been the Premier for 3 months. There are many who do not put all of the blame on her. There are in our party and even in our caucus. Some of them, quite frankly, think that we have to be reasonable. We have to look at what is being offered, how things are trying to be changed. She inherited a mess. I don't think anybody would think she didn't. The Toronto Star cartoon the other day of her walking along casting the shadow of Dalton McGuinty is absolutely on point. So there are some who think that, some who blame her outright because she was the chair of cabinet and she was part of that team.
Chair of the campaign.
And chair of the campaign, yeah.
Okay. One of the things I think that goes into the mix of whether we do or don't have an election right now is whether the people want one. Mm-hmm. What's your sense about whether the people of Ontario, 19 months after the last election, want another election?
I think people don't want an election right up until the moment that there is an election. And then they very much want to make their own decision on the form and nature of the next government. Which is why on this budget, I would, were I in the legislature today, I would vote no. And I would do that because, partly because of scandal and all those built up problems, but also because of the current spending announced in the budget plan today. Before the budget bill and before the details, for myself, I don't need to see those yet because I know that they're spending $1 billion on a wasted program that diverts money away from those who need it most and towards the people who need it least. Okay. And for me, right on the money, that's reason to say no.
Let me get, I think the last poll I saw said about 35% of Ontarians wanted an election, which coincidentally is where your vote is at, the PC vote. So show me the evidence that people are champing at the bit for an election right now.
Well, I've never seen a time, even when elections are scheduled in Ontario, where people are tugging at my sleeve and saying, I can't wait to vote. It's the nature of being a Canadian, dare I say, a Central Ontarian. Having said that, here's what I do know, and what people are telling me. They don't like the idea that the people who want to work, particularly sons and daughters who have come out of post-secondary and maybe have a PhD in something and wind up being cashiers, they don't like the idea that the province has gone down, that we've lost our manufacturing sector. that it hasn't been successfully replaced, that Dalton McGuinty and Kathleen Wynne and that whole cast of characters decided that an appropriate bailout was something like the Green Energy Act. All of these things. And then you add to it the oranges and the e-healths and now the gas plants. And what you talk about, and you used the term in discussing with Mr. Prue, moral authority to govern. We don't believe they any longer have the moral authority to govern. And to a comment that Mr. Prue made, we think that actually the linkage of something like the gas plants with the budget is absolutely there, because it speaks to this government's ability to hold sway, to capture the imagination and the belief of the people out there who are going to cast votes. And I think that's what will be the determining factor in whether there's an election or not.
Let me ask Michael Prue. It's very interesting. You know, the finance minister is usually the star of budget day. But as soon as that budget was introduced, suddenly the focus is on the NDP, because obviously the future of the government is in your hands. When will you tell us the results of your consultation?
I would think it's not going to be very long. I mean, let's look at the process. There has to be 8 hours of debate set out over 12 sessional days. So sometime before the end of the month, the 12 sessional days will be finished. The 8 hours of debate will be finished. There will have to be a vote, and we will let you know what we're doing before then.
You will not just show up to the House and unannounced. You're going to tell us how you intend to vote beforehand.
Absolutely.
Okay. I want to thank all three of you for coming in tonight and giving us your reactions to the budget. Peter Shurman, the PC MPP for Thornhill, Michael Prue, the NDP member for Beaches East York, and Kevin O'Donnell, Green Party's finance critic, and someday would like to have a seat in the Ontario legislature, I'm sure. Thanks very much, you three.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.